So 50 years after students rose up on June 16 back in 1976, Wits University is marking this anniversary with events that revisit the role of higher learning institutions during the uprisings and their aftermath. Today, Wits is reflecting on the legacy and asking what role institutions play in nation building today. For this, let's bring in SABC News anchor Liesl Wilson, who's at a Wits Art Museum this morning and joins us now live. And Liesl, it's so important, of course, for us to reflect on this 50-year milestone as we also try to define what activism in those spaces looks like today.
Ayanda, a very good morning to you and to our viewers. You know, to understand where we are and where we're headed, we have to look back in hindsight. And so tomorrow, the 16th of June, of course, marks 50 years since the Soweto uprisings. It was a pivotal moment for the country at large. We're obviously looking at how the youth took to the streets to fight for dignity, to fight for equality, to protest against Afrikaans as a language of instruction, which quickly turned into the broader fight against the apartheid system. Back then, the youth of 1976 did not have a voice. But the class of 2026 does have a voice. But obviously now we're looking at 30 years into our democracy. What does that mean, particularly when it comes to voter participation and electoral processes? You know that over 20 million is what the population amounts to for our youth. So with that being said, I mean, we're obviously looking at how they disconnected from the voter participation process, whether it's trust, whether it's representation, whether it's just that generational divide. We're trying to just ascertain how these issues then connect to them. Of course, we're looking at issues of housing, we're looking at issues of electricity, of water, jobs, transport, all that taking center stage. And so perhaps as we reflect on that plight, we look at where to from here. Today's conversations are going to be, you know, speaking to how we take on that baton, the class of 1976, and then move that into the electoral processes for 2026 for the local government election. So you can stay tuned. We are live from the Wits Art Museum here in Braamfontein in Johannesburg. Plethora of exhibitions, discussions and legacy projects going on here as people just reflect on, you know, what happened 50 years ago and what that means for the plight of the youth and the nation at large. So you can stay tuned as we bring you all of that coverage. We'll also be chatting to various stakeholders along the value chain as we try to make sense of what lies ahead. For now, let's leave it there. It's back to you in studio. We'll see you in just a moment.
This Tuesday marks 50 years since the historic June 16, 1976 uprising, when thousands of black school children took to the streets in protest against the apartheid government's decision to impose Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. What began as a student protest became a defining moment in South Africa's liberation struggle and also exposed the brutality of the apartheid state to the world. Half a century later, South Africans are reflecting not only on the courage and sacrifice of the youth of 1976, but also on the state of the country they helped shape. Have we delivered on the promise of freedom? What progress has been made, and where have we fallen short? To help us reflect, we're joined by Professor Saths Cooper, an anti-apartheid activist. He's also a clinical psychologist, a former political prisoner as well, and a close associate of Steve Biko, and one of the country's foremost voices on social justice and transformation. Professor Cooper, good to have you on the program this afternoon. As we approach the 50th anniversary of June 16, what emotions and memories come to your mind when you reflect on the events of 1976?
I think it's something that you cannot express in mere words. It's something that shook not only this country, but all around us in a way that showed us our children in higher primary, in secondary and high schools took to the streets to object to inferior education, but also to the entire system that the United Nations regarded as a crime against humanity. And this Tuesday is going to be a moment that I think we need to not merely commemorate what those children and others did for us, but what they supremely sacrificed in terms of many lives lost, in terms of giving up the opportunities that were available to them, slim as they were at that time, so that this freedom, with all its human rights and other provisions, can be let loose. But still, our children are the most excluded from the dispensation. Young people who were at the center stage, not only in June 76, but consistently until the birth of democracy in 94, were moved aside, and older people took the center stage. So it is a terrible indictment on everything that we talk about in terms of our democracy, when the majority wake up every morning without knowing where their next meal is coming from.
Right.
Our children go hungry. We actually have a huge number dying every day, and we call it malnutrition, but they die from hunger. And there's no clear plans on how to resolve something that we inherited from the colonial period into apartheid and has now seemingly become entrenched. The protests we see around us are focused on ourselves effectively, and we are not tackling that power structure, that economic structure that still perpetuates itself in the guise of what we call democracy.
Right. So the youth of 1976 marched against an unjust education system, Professor Cooper. So 50 years later, how would you even assess the state of education in democratic South Africa today?
Oh, it's terrible. I mean, we carry on giving statistics, but we actually, and I'll never forget, some of my co-accused, and I mean, we were amongst the first to be charged and brought to Robben Island in 76, together with students from the Western Cape, that even though that education was bad, we seem to have dropped to the lowest possible denominator now, where we're not equipping our children to mediate a very complex and a technological world. We actually have made people beggars in the land of their birth. We've made dependency where it ought not to be. We've not taught the skills to create, because everybody talks of jobs, but we're not talking about how do we create in our environment meaning for ourselves, including making ourselves useful and creating jobs for ourselves. But we tend to be more reliant on the state, and that, unfortunately, at all levels of government right now, and we have multiple levels that interfere with normal growth and development of the human being and achievement, tends to draw us backwards. And that should be something that's foremost in our minds, so that the class of 2026 does not have to suffer that which our children suffered in 1976.
You touch on a very glaring issue, and that's the level of joblessness in this country, often affecting many young South Africans who face unemployment, inequality, and limited opportunities as well. Do you think the aspirations of the generation of 1976 have been fulfilled in that regard?
No, very plainly, and I deal with lots of persons from that era, brothers and sisters, and now we use the word comrades loosely, who actually look back with anger and with regret, because clearly the flags that were flown in Soweto and elsewhere from that fateful period have been lowered to such an extent that it has made people so dependent, so lost in terms of their sense of self and agency, that we've ended up being a group of ethnicities,
Right.
where race was primary then, it's become entrenched with ethnic and other rivalries. We've not melded as a country, as a people. We've not looked at ourselves as part of a human family where our diversity should be cherished, where we create enablement for opportunity. Why should we look to somebody else to create that job if we gave them an education that they can utilize to free themselves from those shackles which we fought against? The shackles are not there at a physical level, but at a mental and psychological level, and particularly economically.
Yeah.
They are there because you look at who controls our economy. It's the same people who benefited during colonialism and the same people who entrenched apartheid. But those who should move us forward, those who have the political kingdom, have not shown the will or the way to our future, our children, to get there.
Professor Sath Scooper, he's an anti-apartheid activist, also a former political prisoner and clinical psychologist. We do thank him as we reflect on the legacy of June 16 and the journey South Africa has travelled over the past 5 decades as well, since in the advent of democracy as well in this country, giving his reflections there.
Today, on the 16th of June, my home country, South Africa, celebrates National Youth Day. In light of everything that's been going on around the world, I would like to share with you why we celebrate Youth Day and what Youth Day means to our country. Now, I know we like to look at the states a lot.